Every night at 3:17 a.m., the basement light turned itself on. I know because I stopped sleeping through it, and because something eventually left the basement that night. I bought the house because it was quiet, a small 2-story place at the edge of town, built sometime in the 1950s, with a finished basement and a yard that backed up to a thin line of woods. The inspector mentioned nothing unusual. The previous owner was an elderly man who'd passed away in the home, but that didn't bother me. Houses have histories. I just wanted somewhere still. The first night I noticed the light, I chalked it up to a mistake. I woke up to a faint glow creeping under my bedroom door at the end of the hall. I remember checking my phone, 3:19 a.m., and feeling annoyed more than scared. I went downstairs, flicked the basement light off, and went back to bed. The next night, same thing. This time I noticed the clock more clearly, 3:17 a.m. The glow was stronger, brighter, like the light had been on longer. I stood at the top of the basement steps for a moment, listening. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the old pipes ticking as they cooled. I flipped the light off again. By the fourth night, I was waiting for it. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, phone in my hand, the seconds dragging. When the screen changed from 3:16 to 3:17, the basement light snapped on, not gradually, not flickering, just on. A cold wave rolled through my chest. I hadn't been near the switch. No timers, no smart bulbs. The wiring was old but stable, according to the inspector. Still, I tried to stay rational. Faulty switch, power surge. Old houses do weird things. The next morning, I replaced the switch. That night at 3:17, the basement light came on anyway. I started checking everything. I unplugged appliances. I shut off individual breakers during the day and waited through the night. No matter what I tried, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the basement light turned on. Unless I shut off the entire house's power, that's when the knocking started. It wasn't loud, just 3 slow, hollow taps that echoed up from below, always a few minutes after the light turned on. I'd freeze in bed, heart pounding, straining to hear more. Sometimes there were footsteps too, soft, deliberate steps pacing across the basement floor. I stopped going down there at night. One morning, I noticed the smell. Damp earth, like rain-soaked soil. It lingered at the bottom of the basement stairs, thick enough to taste. When I finally forced myself to go down during the day, everything looked normal, until I saw the footprints. They were muddy, bare footprints, not mine. They started near the basement door, as if something had come in from outside, and crossed the concrete floor toward the far wall, where the fuse box was mounted. The prints stopped there. No return trail, just ended. My skin prickled as I followed them. Some of the mud was still wet. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, watching the basement door. At 3:17 a.m., the basement light clicked on beneath me. The knocking followed, louder than before, rattling the stair railing. Then I heard the fuse box open. Metal scraped against metal, a dull clank. The lights in the living room flickered, dimmed, then stabilized. Something was down there, something that knew how the house worked. I grabbed my phone and locked myself in the bathroom, calling the police in a whisper. While I waited, I heard footsteps climbing the basement stairs. Slow, wet steps that stopped just on the other side of the door. The knocking came again, this time from inches away. When the police arrived, they found the basement light on. The fuse box was open. Muddy footprints led from the basement door to the box, and then up the stairs. They stopped outside the bathroom door. No one was found in the house. No signs of forced entry. The officers suggested stress, maybe sleepwalking, maybe a prank, but I watched their faces when they checked the time on my phone, 3:17 a.m. I moved out a week later. The new owners emailed me months after, asking if I'd had electrical issues. They said the basement light kept turning on every night at the same time. I never replied. Last night, out of habit, I checked my phone when I woke up suddenly, heart racing for no reason. It was 3:17 a.m. and the smell of wet earth was in my apartment hallway. I didn't know someone could live inside a house without ever being seen, until I heard them breathe beneath the stairs. They moved only when they thought I was asleep. I was 16 when my parents left me home alone for a long weekend. Our house wasn't new, but it had that quiet, sealed-off feeling. Thick walls, low ceilings, and a basement that always smelled faintly of damp concrete and old cardboard. I hated the basement, but that weekend, it seemed especially aware of me. The first night was normal until around 1 a.m., when I heard a sound that didn't belong. It was slow, heavy, like someone placing their full weight on each step. Not the sharp creak of old wood settling, but deliberate footsteps, moving across the basement floor. I froze in my bed, staring at my door, counting my breaths. We didn't have pets. No one else was supposed to be there. After a minute, the sound stopped. I told myself it was the house. Old houses make noises. That's what everyone says. The next night, it happened again. This time I sat up. The footsteps were closer to the stairs now. One, pause, another. I remember thinking how patient they sounded. Like whoever, or whatever, was down there wasn't in a hurry. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, asking if she'd ever heard noises in the basement at night. She replied half an hour later, probably the pipes. Don't scare yourself. I didn't sleep after that. By the third night, I was exhausted. I left my bedroom door cracked and turned the hallway light on, hoping the glow would make me feel less alone. Around 2 a.m., the sound came back, but this time, it wasn't footsteps. It was a soft scraping, like something being dragged carefully across the floor. I got out of bed and stood at the top of the basement stairs. The air coming up from below was colder than the rest of the house, thick and stale. I flicked the light switch. The basement light buzzed to life, revealing nothing but shadows and storage boxes. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. Nothing answered, but I could feel it then. That sense of being listened to, watched. The next morning I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The breaker panel under the stairs, the metal one everyone forgets about, was slightly open, just enough that I could see darkness behind it. I was sure it had been closed before. I crouched down and touched the edge. The metal was warm, recently handled. I didn't open it right away. I backed up, heart pounding, and checked the basement windows. All locked. No signs of a break-in. No missing items upstairs either. That night I pushed a chair against my bedroom door and stayed awake with a baseball bat I'd found in the garage. I didn't turn the lights off. At 1:47 a.m., the footsteps returned, right beneath me. They were directly under the stairs now. I could hear breathing, slow, controlled, too close. Something brushed against the underside of the stairs. Wood creaked from below, not above. I couldn't stop shaking. Every instinct screamed that if I moved, it would know. Then I heard a soft click. The breaker panel. I don't know why I went down there. Fear does strange things. Maybe I needed proof I wasn't losing my mind. With the bat raised and my phone light on, I crept down the stairs. The basement felt smaller than usual, like the walls had leaned in. The breaker panel was fully open now. Behind it was a crawl space I had never known existed. The opening was narrow, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, the darkness went back farther than it should have. I shined my light in and immediately saw signs someone had been there. A flattened sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, bottled water, and handprints on the concrete wall, smudged and dark, like they'd been there a long time. I backed away, my heel knocking into a paint can. The noise echoed loudly. From inside the crawl space, something shifted. I didn't see them. I only heard a slow inhale, then the sound of someone crawling deeper into the dark. I ran, I locked myself in the bathroom and called the police, whispering like the walls could hear me. They searched the house, the basement, the crawl space. They found more supplies, scratches on the inside of the walls, but no person. The officer told me it was likely someone had been living there secretly, coming out only at night, using the stairs to move between levels while we slept. They never caught anyone. My parents sold the house a month later. Even now, years later, I still wake up some nights convinced I hear footsteps below me, slow, patient, and waiting for me to fall asleep again. The room was warmer than the rest of the basement, and the handprints in the dust were still fresh. That's when I realized someone had been living inside the house with us. I'm a general contractor, and last winter I took a renovation job on a 2-story house built sometime in the 1940s. It sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, the kind where the streets feel frozen in time. The owners, a young couple, wanted the basement finished into a livable space. They joked about the place being creepy, but nothing stood out to me at first. Old houses always feel that way. The basement was unfinished, all concrete and exposed beams. It smelled faintly of damp earth and rusted pipes. According to the blueprints the owners had, the layout was simple, rectangular, no hidden sections, no crawl spaces beyond the standard utility access. I'd worked on dozens of houses like it. About a week into the job, I noticed something odd. One wall, toward the back of the basement, sounded different when I tapped it, hollow, not the usual solid thud of poured concrete. I figured it was just a poorly patched section or an old repair job. Still, it bothered me. Old houses hide things, and not all of them are harmless. I mentioned it to the owners. They shrugged and told me to check it out if I thought it mattered. The next day, I brought a sledgehammer. It took more effort than I expected. The wall wasn't thin drywall or a cheap cover-up. It was solid masonry, intentionally sealed. When it finally broke through, a rush of stale, warm air poured out, carrying a smell I can only describe as old sweat and dust. Behind the wall was a room. It was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with no windows and low ceilings. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, burned out and coated in grime. The floor was concrete, but there was a thin mattress pushed against the far wall, indented in the center, like someone had been sleeping there regularly. At first I assumed it was some forgotten storage space, or an old storm shelter, but then I saw the trash. Food wrappers, recent ones, plastic water bottles, half crushed, a loaf of bread in a bag, stiff but not moldy, a pile of empty cans stacked neatly in the corner. Someone had been trying to keep things organized. My stomach tightened. The dust on the floor was mostly undisturbed, except for one area near the mattress. There were footprints, bare feet, and on the far wall, just beneath the light socket, were handprints smeared into the dust. 5 fingers, dragged downward, like someone had been steadying themselves in the dark. They weren't old. I backed out of the room slowly, my skin prickling. The basement suddenly felt too quiet. No hum from the furnace, no distant traffic, just my own breathing, loud and shallow in my ears. I called the homeowners down. When they saw the room, the color drained from their faces. They swore they had no idea it existed. The blueprints didn't show it. The previous owners had never mentioned it. We debated calling the police, but there was no sign of a crime, no blood, no restraints, nothing overtly illegal, just evidence of habitation, someone living in secret. The husband laughed nervously and suggested maybe a squatter had broken in at some point, but the wall had been sealed from the inside. There was no door, no visible entrance. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the warmth in that room. Basements are cold in winter, especially unfinished ones, but that space felt lived in, insulated somehow, preserved. The next morning, the wife called me. her voice shaking. She asked if I'd been back to the house after leaving the day before. I told her no. She said the mattress had shifted. I went back immediately. The room was the same, mostly, but the pile of cans was messier, like it had been knocked over and restacked in a hurry. One of the water bottles was gone, and the dust near the entrance, where I had left clear boot prints, now had smaller footprints overlapping them, bare, leading out of the room, stopping just short of the broken wall, as if someone had stood there, listening. The police came after that. They searched the house thoroughly. Attic, crawl spaces, vents, nothing. No hidden passages, no signs of forced entry. They told the owners it was probably an old survival room someone had used years ago, and the recent signs were environmental disturbances, airflow, settling dust. None of us believed that. The owners decided to stay with family until the renovation was done. I finished the job faster than planned. I didn't like being alone in that house. On my last day there, I was packing up my tools when I heard a sound from the basement. A soft thump, then another, slow, careful. I stood at the top of the stairs, heart pounding, listening. The sound stopped, replaced by something else, a faint dragging noise, like fingers brushing against concrete. I didn't go down to check. When the wall was sealed back up, I felt no relief, just a deep, crawling dread. Because as I locked up and left for the final time, I noticed something in the dust on the basement stairs. Handprints, fresh ones, facing upward.